Nobody wants us, Mama. Nobody. The words hit harder than the blistering sun above. Mara Collins stood frozen on that desolate road, her 6 children wilting behind her like flowers in a drought. 3 towns had turned them away. 3 towns had looked at her ragged family and slammed doors in their faces. Her youngest daughter's tears cut through the dust, and Mara felt her knees buckle. This was it, the moment she'd fought against for months, the moment she had nothing left. But if you think this is where their story ends, you're wrong. Because sometimes, when the whole world says no, one person's yes changes everything. Stay with me until the end of this journey. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The heat was a living thing. It pressed down on Mara Collins like a hand pushing her into the earth, relentless and cruel. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, a ribbon of packed dirt and broken dreams winding through the Oklahoma countryside. Dust devils danced in the distance, mocking her with their freedom of movement while her own feet felt bolted to the ground. Behind her, 6 pairs of eyes watched and waited. Thomas, her oldest at 14, had his arm around 10-year-old Samuel, who swayed on his feet. The twins, Michael and Matthew, sat in the dirt, too exhausted even to swat at the flies buzzing around their sunburned faces. Lily, only 8 years old, clutched the tattered remains of a cloth doll. And then there was Grace. Sweet, gentle Grace, just 6 years old with tears streaming down her dirt-streaked cheeks. "Mama," Grace whispered, her voice cracking, "I'm so thirsty." Mara turned to look at her youngest daughter, and the sight nearly broke her. Grace's lips were cracked and bleeding. Her blonde hair, once the color of summer wheat, hung limp and gray with dust. The child's eyes, those beautiful blue eyes that used to sparkle with laughter, were hollow now, emptied out by weeks of rejection and wandering. "I know, baby, I know." Mara's voice came out as barely more than a rasp. The canteen at her hip had been empty since yesterday morning. Just a little further. It was a lie. She'd been telling that lie for 3 days now. Thomas stepped forward, his young face aged beyond its years by responsibility he should never have had to carry. "Ma, there's nothing further. We passed the last farmhouse 2 hours ago. There's nothing out here but—" "Don't!" Mara held up a hand, cutting him off. She couldn't hear it, couldn't hear the truth spoken aloud, not when it would shatter the last fragile thread of hope she was clinging to. "Don't say it, Thomas. Please." Her son's jaw tightened, and she saw her late husband in that expression, the same stubborn set of the chin, the same storm brewing in dark eyes. But Thomas wasn't his father. He was just a boy being forced to become a man too soon, and the weight of that knowledge settled over Mara like another layer of the oppressive heat. She turned back to the road ahead. Somewhere out there, beyond the shimmering waves of heat distortion, there had to be someone who would take them in. Someone who would look at her 6 children and see value instead of burden. Someone who wouldn't ask questions about her dead husband or the brother-in-law who'd driven them from their home with threats and violence. Someone. Anyone. "We'll rest when we find shade," she announced, forcing steel into her voice that she didn't feel. "Come on now. On your feet." The children obeyed because that's what children did. They trusted their mother, even when their mother was leading them into a wasteland with nothing but empty promises and an emptier canteen. Michael and Matthew struggled upright, leaning on each other. Samuel took Grace's hand. Lily clutched her doll tighter. And Thomas? Thomas picked up the bundle that held everything they owned in the world and hoisted it onto his thin shoulders without complaint. They walked, one foot in front of the other. One step, then another, then another. The sun climbed higher, impossibly hot for mid-June, and Mara felt her consciousness beginning to blur at the edges. How long had it been since she'd eaten? 2 days? 3? The children had gotten the last of the bread that morning. Stale and hard, but food nonetheless. She'd told them she wasn't hungry, had watched them divide those meager portions with the careful mathematics of survival. The truth was, she was starving. Her stomach had stopped growling hours ago, moved past hunger into a hollow ache that radiated through her entire body. Her head felt light, disconnected from her neck. The world tilted slightly to the left, and she had to concentrate to keep walking in a straight line. "Mama, look!" Lily's voice cut through the haze. Mara blinked, trying to focus on where her daughter was pointing. There, about a quarter-mile ahead, was a cluster of buildings. Not a town, nothing so grand as that. Just a few structures huddled together like they were trying to protect each other from the vast emptiness surrounding them. A general store, maybe. A way station. Something. Hope flared in Mara's chest, bright and painful. "Come on," she urged, reaching back to take Grace's free hand. "Just a little bit further, for real this time." They stumbled forward with renewed purpose, the children sensing their mother's sudden energy. The buildings grew clearer as they approached. A general store, yes, and what looked like a boarding house next to it. There were horses tied to a rail out front. People. Civilization. Help. Mara's heart was pounding as they climbed the 3 wooden steps to the store's porch. Through the window, she could see shelves stocked with goods, barrels of flour and sugar, hanging strings of dried peppers. Her mouth watered involuntarily. When was the last time she'd seen such abundance? She pushed open the door, and a small bell chimed overhead. The conversation inside stopped immediately. 3 men stood at the counter, ranchers by the look of them, with sun-weathered faces and dusty boots. Behind the counter, a thick-set woman with iron-gray hair looked up from her ledger, her expression shifting from curiosity to wariness in the space of a heartbeat. Mara felt that look like a slap. She'd seen it before, in the last 3 towns. It was the look that said, trouble. It was the look that said, we don't want your kind here. But she'd come too far to turn back now. "Please," she said, hating the desperation in her voice, but unable to hide it. "My children need water. We've been walking for days, and we're stores for paying customers." The woman's voice was flat, final. She didn't even look at the children clustered behind Mara in the doorway. "I can pay." Mara fumbled for the small pouch at her waist, her fingers clumsy with dehydration and exhaustion. She pulled out 3 coins, nearly the last of her money, and placed them on the counter with a hand that shook. "Please, just some water and maybe bread if you have any to spare." One of the ranchers snorted. 6 kids, he muttered to his companion. "No husband in sight. You know what that means." The implication hung in the air, ugly and accusatory. Mara felt her face burn, but she kept her eyes on the store owner, refusing to give the man the satisfaction of her reaction. "The water," she repeated. "Please." The woman looked at the coins, then at Mara, then past her to where the children waited. For a moment, one brief, shining moment, Mara thought she saw something soften in that hard face. Then the woman's mouth thinned into a line, and she pushed the coins back across the counter. "Can't help you. We got our own to worry about. Town's full up as it is. Don't need more mouths we can't feed." She crossed her arms over her ample chest. "Best you move along. We're not asking to stay in town, just water, just—" "I said move along." The woman's voice rose, sharp enough to make little Grace flinch. "We got standards here. We don't want—" Her eyes raked over Mara's worn dress, her dusty children, the desperation practically radiating from them. "We don't want your kind bringing trouble." Thomas's hand found Mara's elbow. "Ma," he said quietly, "let's go." But Mara couldn't move. She couldn't accept this. Not again. Not when Grace was crying and Samuel was swaying and the twins looked ready to collapse. Not when they'd walked so far on nothing but hope and her promises that everything would be all right. "My husband is dead." The words came out cold and clear, cutting through the hostile silence. "He died 6 months ago in a logging accident. His brother tried to take our farm, She stopped, unwilling to speak of Victor's violence in front of her children. "We've been walking for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. We just need water, that's all. Just water." One of the ranchers shifted uncomfortably. The youngest of the 3, he couldn't have been more than 25, and something in Mara's plea seemed to touch him. "Martha," he said to the store owner, "maybe we could—" "No." Martha's voice was iron. "Last time we took in strays, they stole half my inventory and disappeared in the night. I learned my lesson. You want charity? Try the church in Bartlesville. That's 40 miles east." She pointed towards the door. "Now I asked you polite. Don't make me get Sheriff Daniels." The threat was clear. Mara felt something inside her crack. Not break. Not yet. But crack. She scooped up her coins with shaking fingers and backed toward the door, her children parting to let her through. They stumbled out into the brutal sunlight, and the door slammed behind them with a finality that echoed in Mara's bones. "Mama?" Grace's voice was so small, so broken. "Why doesn't anyone want us?" Mara opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. What could she say? How could she explain to a 6-year-old that the world was cruel and cold, that people looked at them and saw only liability, only burden? How could she explain that her own failure to protect them had brought them to this desperate moment? She couldn't. So she did the only thing she could do. She kept walking. They left the cluster of buildings behind, headed back into the emptiness. The road stretched on, endless and unforgiving. Mara's vision swam. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, moving without her conscious command. One step, another, another. Behind her, she heard Michael start to cry, quiet, hopeless sobs that he tried to muffle. Matthew joined him, then Lily. Even Thomas, her strong, stoic Thomas, made a sound like a wounded animal. And Grace, sweet Grace with her constant questions and her unshakable faith in her mother. Grace who believed that Mama could fix anything, could make everything all right. Grace who was now sobbing like her heart was breaking. "Nobody wants us, Mama," she wailed, the words torn from her small chest. "Nobody wants Mama and us. Nobody, nobody, nobody." Mara's legs gave out. She didn't decide to fall. One moment she was walking, and the next the ground was rushing up to meet her. She hit the dirt hard, tasting blood where she'd bitten her tongue. The world spun sickeningly. She tried to push herself up, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. This was it. This was how it ended. Not with violence or drama, but with simple exhaustion in the middle of nowhere, under a sun that didn't care if they lived or died. "Ma!" Thomas was beside her, his hands on her shoulders. "Ma, get up. Please get up." "Can't," she whispered. The word felt like defeat, final and absolute. "I can't, Thomas. I can't anymore." The children gathered around her, a circle of frightened faces and tear-stained cheeks. Lily pressed her doll into Mara's hand as if the toy could somehow transfer strength. Samuel was praying under his breath, words Mara couldn't quite make out. The twins clutched each other, and Grace. Grace knelt in the dust beside her mother and laid her small hand on Mara's cheek. "It's okay, Mama," she said through her tears. "You can rest now. We'll wait with you." The word shattered something in Mara's chest. They would wait with her. Her children would sit here in the burning sun and wait while she failed them one final time. They would wait, and eventually they would fall too, one by one, because she hadn't been strong enough, hadn't been smart enough, hadn't been enough. She closed her eyes against the tears that wanted to fall. She was so tired. So very, very tired. "Then I want you all." The voice came from somewhere above her, male and unfamiliar. Mara's eyes snapped open, but the sun was directly overhead, turning the figure standing over her into nothing but a dark silhouette against the blinding light. "What?" The word came out as a croak. The figure moved, blocking the sun, and Mara could finally see him. A man, tall and lean, probably in his mid-30s, with dark hair and eyes the color of creek water after a storm. He wore the practical clothes of a rancher, and he was holding out a canteen with condensation beading on its metal surface. "Water," he said simply. "Drink." Mara stared at the canteen like it might disappear if she reached for it. Some kind of mirage, a hallucination brought on by heat and desperation. But then Grace was taking it from the man's hand, her small fingers wrapping around the metal. "Is it real?" Grace whispered. The man's weathered face softened. "Real as rain, little one. Go on." Grace drank, and the sound of her swallowing was the most beautiful thing Mara had ever heard. Then the canteen was being passed to Samuel, to the twins, to Lily, to Thomas. Finally it came back to Mara. The water was cool and clean, tasting faintly of metal and minerals. It hit her stomach like a shock, and for a moment she thought she might be sick. But then her body remembered what it was supposed to do with water, and she drank deep, feeling life seep back into her limbs. When she lowered the canteen, the man was still standing there, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you so much. We can pay—" She reached for her coins again, but he waved her off. "Keep your money." He glanced at the children, then back at Mara. Heard what happened in town. Martha Jensen's got a hard heart and a long memory. Don't take it personal. How did you... Was in the store. Back room, getting supplies loaded. He gestured toward a wagon parked a little ways down the road, hitched to two sturdy horses. Heard the whole thing. Shame washed over Mara, hot and bitter. He'd heard her begging, heard her desperation, heard Martha Jensen's rejection and her children's tears. We'll be on our way, she said, struggling to her feet. Thomas moved to help her, but she waved him off, needing to do this herself. Thank you for the water. We won't trouble you further. Where exactly are you planning to go? The question stopped her. Where were they going? She'd been heading east, vaguely toward Bartlesville because Martha had mentioned it, but 40 miles might as well have been 400 in their condition. We'll figure something out, she said, lifting her chin. We always do. It was another lie, but pride was all she had left. The man studied her for a long moment, and Mara had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her bravado to the terrified, exhausted woman underneath. Finally, he spoke. My name's Jonah Mercer. I've got a ranch about 5 miles north of here. He nodded toward the horizon. It's not fancy, but there's shelter, food, and all the water you can drink. You and your children are welcome to rest there. No strings, no expectations, just a place to recover before you move on. Mara's first instinct was to refuse. She'd learned the hard way that nothing in this world came without strings. Men who offered help always wanted something in return. Her labor, her body, her children's servitude. Victor had taught her that lesson with his fists and his threats, but Grace was looking up at this Jonah Mercer with hope rekindled in her blue eyes. Thomas was watching Mara carefully, waiting to follow her lead, but clearly wanting to accept. The twins had stopped crying. Samuel was already standing straighter, as if the mere promise of food and shelter had given him new strength. Why? Mara asked bluntly. Why would you help us? Jonah Mercer was quiet for a moment, his gray-green eyes distant. Because someone should have helped me once and didn't. Because those children don't deserve to suffer for circumstances beyond their control. Because, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Because I heard your little girl crying that nobody wanted you, and I figured someone ought to prove her wrong. The simplicity of it hit Mara harder than any pretty speech could have. He wasn't promising to save them, wasn't making grand declarations. He was just offering what he had because it was the right thing to do. Still, she hesitated. Ma, Thomas said quietly, Grace can't walk much further. Neither can the twins. He was right. She could see it in their faces. They were at the end of their endurance. If she made them walk another 5 miles in this heat, someone might not make it. Pride was one thing. Her children's lives were another. One night, she heard herself say, we'll rest for one night, then be on our way. I don't want charity, Mr. Mercer. I work for my keep. Fair enough. He walked toward his wagon and began rearranging supplies in the back, making space. Though I should warn you, the ranch is pretty isolated. Don't get many visitors, and the nearest neighbors are the Johnsons, about 10 miles west. It's quiet out there. Quiet sounds perfect, Mara said, and meant it. They'd had enough of towns and people and judgment to last a lifetime. Jonah helped the children into the wagon bed, his movements gentle despite his size. He settled them on top of burlap sacks and grain bags, making sure each one was secure. Grace immediately curled up against Thomas, her eyes already drooping. The twins sprawled out, too tired to even sit upright. Lily clutched her doll and leaned against Samuel, who put his arm around his little sister protectively. When Jonah turned to help Mara up to the wagon seat, she saw the calluses on his hands, the scars that marked years of hard work. These were working hands, honest hands. Something in her chest loosened slightly. She climbed up beside him, every muscle in her body screaming protest. The wagon seat was hard wood, but it felt like a throne after days of walking. Jonah clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward with a gentle lurch. They rode in silence for a while. The only sounds, the creak of wheels, the plod of hooves, and the whisper of wind through dry grass. Mara kept glancing back at her children, making sure they were all still there, still breathing, still real. Each time she found them exactly where they should be, and each time the knot in her chest loosened a little more. How old are they? Jonah's question was casual, conversational, not prying, just making talk. Thomas is 14, Samuel's 10. The twins, Michael and Matthew, are 9. Lily just turned 8 last month, and Grace is 6. Mara's voice softened on her youngest daughter's name. She's the baby. That's a good-sized family. There was no judgment in the observation, which was unusual enough that Mara found herself relaxing slightly. My husband wanted a big family, said a house full of children was a house full of joy. Her throat tightened. He died before he got to see how much joy they really brought. I'm sorry. 2 simple words, but Jonah said them like he meant them. Not perfunctory condolence, but genuine sympathy from someone who understood loss. Logging accident, Mara heard herself say. She didn't know why she was telling him this, maybe because he'd shared his water and his wagon without asking for her life story first, which made her want to give it freely. Tree fell wrong. He died instantly. They said he didn't suffer, but I don't know if that's true or if they just said it to make me feel better. Probably both. Jonah kept his eyes on the road ahead. People want to comfort the living, but they don't always have the right words, so they say what they hope is true. Mara nodded. That felt right. True. After James died, his brother Victor showed up, said the farm was family property, said it should go to him since James was gone. The words tasted bitter, but she forced them out. He wanted me to marry him, said it was the only proper solution. When I refused, she touched her ribs unconsciously, remembering the bruises. He made it clear that proper didn't matter to him one way or another. Jonah's hands tightened on the reins, his knuckles going white, but he didn't interrupt. So we left, packed what we could carry, and left in the middle of the night. I thought someone would take us in, thought people would see a woman with children who needed help, and she laughed, a harsh sound. I was naive. Not naive, Jonah said quietly, just decent. You expected people to be decent because that's what you would be. That's not naive. That's human. Mara blinked against the sudden sting in her eyes. When was the last time someone had spoken to her with such simple kindness? When was the last time someone had seen her as human rather than a problem to be solved or a burden to be avoided? What about you? She asked, needing to deflect before she started crying in earnest. You always ride around rescuing desperate women and their children? A ghost of a smile crossed Jonah's face. Not typically, no. This is pretty much a first. Then why us? He was quiet for a long time, long enough that Mara thought he might not answer. Then, had a family once, wife and a daughter. Fever took them both, winter of '84. House has been empty ever since. He paused. Heard your little girl crying, and I just couldn't leave you there. Couldn't let her think nobody wanted her when there was someone who could help. Mara's throat closed up completely. She understood now, the sadness in his eyes, the careful way he'd handled the children, the isolated ranch. Jonah Mercer was a man who'd lost everything and survived it, carrying his ghosts with quiet dignity. I'm sorry, she whispered. Me too. He cleared his throat. But that's old pain. Doesn't do to dwell on it. We're here. Mara looked up and felt her breath catch. The ranch spread out before them like something from a dream, or maybe just so different from the dusty roads and hostile towns that it seemed dreamlike by comparison. A sturdy 2-story house painted white, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A large barn, its red paint faded but solid. Corrals and fences in good repair. A windmill turning lazily in the breeze, pumping water into a trough where cattle gathered. It wasn't grand. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and whole and cared for, and after weeks of rejection and wandering, it looked like paradise. It's beautiful, Mara breathed. It's home, Jonah said simply. He pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. Come on, let's get these children inside and fed. We can figure out the rest later. He hopped down and started helping the children from the wagon bed. Thomas climbed down on his own, then turned to help his siblings. Samuel took Lily's hand. The twins stumbled a bit, but made it to solid ground. And Grace reached up for Jonah without hesitation, trusting him completely in the way that only children can. Jonah lifted her down gently, his big hand spanning her tiny waist. There you go, little one. Thank you, Mr. Mercer, Grace said solemnly. You're nice. Something shifted in Jonah's expression. Pain and pleasure mixed together. You're welcome, Grace. Mara climbed down last, her legs shaky. Jonah offered his hand to steady her, and she took it, feeling the warmth and strength in his grip. For just a moment their eyes met, and Mara saw understanding there. He knew what it cost her to accept help, knew what it meant to be this desperate, this vulnerable. Come on, he said gently. Let's get you all inside. The house was cool and dim after the brightness outside. Mara's eyes adjusted slowly, taking in the simple but comfortable furnishings. A large kitchen with a wood stove, a sitting room with sturdy chairs and a worn sofa. Everything clean, everything orderly, everything speaking of a man who'd maintained his home, even when he lived in it alone. Bathroom's upstairs, first door on the left, Jonah said. There's a pump inside, indoor plumbing, luxury of luxuries. Water won't be hot, but it's clean. You all can wash up while I get food started. The children looked at Mara for permission. She nodded, and they scattered like birds, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the excitement of a real house with real amenities. Their footsteps thundered on the stairs, and Mara heard Grace's delighted squeal when she discovered the bathroom. They're good kids, Jonah observed, moving toward the kitchen. They are. Mara followed him, unsure what to do with herself. Mr. Mercer, I meant what I said. I work for my keep. If you'll just tell me what needs doing. Right now, what needs doing is sitting down before you fall down. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table. Please. Mara wanted to argue, but her body had other ideas. She sank into the chair gratefully, and suddenly everything hit her at once. The relief of being indoors, the safety of walls and a roof, the simple fact that her children were laughing somewhere above her instead of crying on a dusty road. She put her head in her hands and tried very hard not to fall apart. She heard Jonah moving around the kitchen, the clink of dishes, the scrape of a pot. He was humming something under his breath, a tune she didn't recognize but soothing nonetheless. The normalcy of it was almost too much to bear. Here. She looked up to find him setting a glass of water and a plate with bread and cheese in front of her. Simple food, but her stomach growled at the sight of it. Eat, Jonah said. You can't take care of them if you don't take care of yourself first. It was such a practical observation, so matter-of-fact, that Mara found herself obeying. The bread was fresh, the cheese sharp and good. She ate slowly, making herself chew and swallow properly, despite her body's urge to wolf it down. Jonah worked at the stove, and gradually the kitchen filled with the smell of cooking, beans and salt pork, cornbread, something that might have been stew. Mara's mouth watered. When was the last time she'd had a hot meal? The children came back downstairs, their faces scrubbed clean, revealing how thin they'd become. But they were smiling, actually smiling, and that was worth more than anything. Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes, Jonah announced. Thomas, you want to help me set the table? Thomas straightened up, clearly pleased to be asked. Yes, sir. They worked together, man and boy, and Mara watched them with an ache in her chest. James used to involve Thomas in everything, teaching him ranch work and carpentry, treating him like a partner instead of a child. Thomas had lost that when his father died, and she could see how hungry he was for male guidance now. Grace climbed into Mara's lap, something she hadn't done in weeks. Mama, she whispered, is this real? Are we really going to stay here? Just for tonight, baby, Mara whispered back. Just to rest. But Mr. Mercer is nice, and there's so much room. Maybe... Grace. Mara's voice was gentle but firm. We can't stay. This is Mr. Mercer's home. We're just visiting. Grace's face fell, but she nodded against Mara's shoulder. Mara held her tight, breathing in the scent of her daughter's hair. Clean now, thank goodness. Clean and safe and fed. Just for tonight, she told herself. Tomorrow they would move on. They had to. Because accepting more than one night's charity would mean admitting just how desperate they really were. Would mean owing a debt she couldn't repay. Would mean trusting someone again, and Mara didn't know if she had that kind of trust left in her. But tonight her children would sleep in beds instead of on hard ground. Tonight they would have full bellies and clean faces. Tonight they would be safe. And for now, for this one precious moment, that would have to be enough. Dinner that first night was a quiet affair, broken only by the soft clink of spoons against bowls and the occasional murmur of appreciation from the children. Mara watched them eat with an intensity that bordered on pain, watched them savor every bite of beans and cornbread, watched them drink glass after glass of cool water, watched the color slowly return to their faces. Jonah sat at the head of the table, his own plate barely touched as he observed his unexpected guests. He'd set out 8 places, and the sight of that long table filled with people seemed to affect him in ways he tried to hide. His hands would pause mid-motion, his eyes would go distant, and Mara wondered what ghosts he was seeing in the spaces between them. "Mr. Mercer," Samuel said suddenly, breaking the silence, "this is the best food I've ever had." A small smile tugged at Jonah's mouth. "It's just beans and cornbread, son. Still the best." Samuel's earnest face was so serious that even Thomas cracked a smile. "Well then, I'm glad you're enjoying it." Jonah's voice was gruff, but Mara heard the pleasure beneath it. "There's plenty more if anyone wants seconds." The twins immediately held up their bowls, and Jonah rose to ladle more stew into them. Grace watched this exchange with wide eyes, as if witnessing a miracle. Maybe to her it was. A man who offered more instead of less, who gave freely without counting the cost. After dinner, Jonah showed them upstairs to the bedrooms. There were 4 of them, all simply furnished but clean. The beds had real mattresses, real pillows, quilts that looked hand-stitched and well cared for. "Boys can take this room here," Jonah said, opening the door to a space with 2 double beds. "Girls can have the one across the hall. Mrs. Collins, you can take the room at the end." He paused. "The other room, I keep closed. It's just not available." Mara understood without him having to explain further. That was where his wife and daughter had slept, where their things probably still remained, untouched and waiting for people who would never return. She nodded, respecting his boundary without question. "This is more than generous, Mr. Mercer. Thank you." "Just Jonah," he said, "and you're welcome. I'll be downstairs if anyone needs anything. Breakfast is at sunrise." He disappeared down the stairs, and Mara heard the back door open and close. Through the window, she could see him walking toward the barn, his shoulders set in a way that spoke of a man seeking solitude to process his thoughts. The children scattered to their assigned rooms, and for the first time in weeks, Mara heard them laugh, really laugh, not the brittle forced cheer they'd been using to keep her spirits up. She stood in the hallway listening to that sound, letting it wash over her like rain after a drought. "Mama, come see," Grace called from the girls' room. "There's a real mirror and everything." Mara joined her daughters, finding Grace and Lily already bouncing on one of the beds, testing its springs with the delight of children who'd been sleeping on hard ground for too long. The room was painted a soft yellow, faded now, but still cheerful. There were curtains on the windows, actual curtains, not just burlap sacks. A dresser with a water basin, a small rocking chair in the corner. "Can we really sleep here tonight, Mama?" Lily asked, clutching her tattered doll. "Yes, baby. Tonight we can sleep here." "What about tomorrow?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. What about tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days stretching beyond that? What about the future that Mara couldn't see, couldn't plan for, couldn't promise? "Tomorrow we'll see," she said, which was not an answer but all she had to give. She got the girls settled in their night clothes, the same worn dresses they'd been traveling in, but at least clean now from their washing. She checked on the boys, finding them already sprawled across the 2 beds in various states of exhaustion. Thomas was still awake, staring at the ceiling. "You okay?" she asked quietly from the doorway. "Just thinking." He turned his head to look at her. "Ma, what if we stayed?" "Thomas, I know. We're moving on tomorrow. But what if we didn't? What if we asked Mr. Mercer, Jonah, if we could work for him? I'm strong. I can do ranch work. Samuel can help too, and the twins—" "We're not staying." Mara's voice was firmer than she felt. "We can't impose on this man's kindness any more than we already are. It's not imposing if we work for our keep. You said yourself you don't take charity. And I meant it. But this—" She gestured at the room, the house, the impossible generosity of it all. "This is too much, Thomas. We'd never be able to repay it." Her son's jaw set in that stubborn way she was coming to know too well. Maybe he doesn't want to be repaid. Maybe he just wants help around the ranch. Did you think of that? Go to sleep, Thomas. Ma, sleep. She softened her tone. We'll talk in the morning, but the answer's still going to be no. We leave tomorrow. That's final. She closed the door on his disappointed face and walked to her own room, every step feeling like she was wading through deep water. The room Jonah had given her was simple and spare. A bed, a dresser, a window looking out over the dark expanse of the ranch. She could see the barn from here, a lamp burning inside where Jonah was probably doing evening chores. Mara sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself break down. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside, wrenched from a place she'd been keeping locked down tight for weeks. She pressed her face into her hands, trying to muffle the sound so the children wouldn't hear. All the fear and exhaustion and desperation she'd been holding back came pouring out in great heaving gasps. They'd been so close to dying out there on that road. So close. Another day without water, another night in the open, and one of the children might not have made it. The knowledge of how narrow their escape had been hit her now with devastating force. And this stranger, this quiet, grief-worn man, had saved them without hesitation, without demands, without judgment, had looked at her ragged family and seen people worth helping, had given them shelter and food and safety when the whole world had turned them away. How was she supposed to repay that? How was she supposed to walk away from it tomorrow and go back to the uncertainty of the road? But how could she stay? What right did she have to insert her broken family into this man's carefully ordered life? He'd lost his own family. He didn't need the chaos and noise and constant need that came with 6 children. He'd offered one night of kindness, not a lifetime commitment. She had to leave. It was the only honorable choice. So why did it feel like the worst decision she'd ever made? Mara cried until she had no tears left, then washed her face in the basin and changed into the one spare dress she'd managed to pack. It was as worn as the one she'd been wearing, but at least it was clean. She lay down on the bed, the first real bed she'd slept in since leaving the farm, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep came eventually, dragging her down into dreams of dusty roads and slammed doors, and Grace's voice crying, "Nobody wants us," over and over again. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came back. The ranch, Jonah's kindness, her decision to leave today. She dressed quickly and went downstairs, following the scent of breakfast. In the kitchen, she found Jonah at the stove and Thomas already seated at the table. The two of them engaged in quiet conversation. "Fence posts need replacing in the north pasture," Jonah was saying. "Been meaning to get to it, but it's a 2-man job and I've been putting it off." "I could help," Thomas said immediately. "I've done fence work before. My pa taught me." Jonah glanced up and saw Mara in the doorway. Something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, at being caught making plans with her son. "Morning, Mrs. Collins. Coffee's hot." "Thank you." She moved to the pot and poured herself a cup, the warmth of it seeping into her hands. "Thomas, can I speak with you outside?" Her son's face fell. He knew what was coming. "Ma, outside, now." They stepped onto the back porch, and Mara closed the door behind them. The morning air was already warm, promising another scorcher of a day. In the distance, cattle were lowing, and she could hear the windmill's steady creak. "I know what you're thinking," Thomas said before she could speak. "But Ma, he needs help. The ranch is too much for one man, you can see that. And we need a place to stay. It makes sense. We're leaving this morning." Mara kept her voice low but firm. "I appreciate Mr. Mercer's hospitality, but we've imposed enough." "Imposed? Ma, he offered. He wants us here." "He offered us one night. One night, Thomas, not a permanent arrangement." "Then let's ask him for a permanent arrangement. What's the worst that can happen? He says no, and we leave anyway. At least we'd know we tried." Mara shook her head. "I won't beg, Thomas. I won't put this man in the position of having to reject us to our faces. He's been too kind for that." "So instead you're just going to run away?" Thomas's voice rose, frustration bleeding through. "We finally find someone decent, someone who might actually help us, and you're too proud to even ask?" "Watch your tone." "No." Thomas stood his ground, and Mara was struck again by how much he'd grown, how much like his father he looked when angry. No, Ma, I'm tired of watching you make decisions based on pride instead of what's best for us. We're starving. We're homeless. Grace cried herself to sleep last night because she knows we're leaving today. And for what? So you can feel like you didn't accept charity? The words hit like physical blows. You don't understand. I understand that we almost died out there. I understand that the twins are so thin I can count their ribs. I understand that you fainted yesterday because you gave us all the food and kept none for yourself. Thomas's eyes were wet now, but his voice stayed steady. I understand that you're scared, Ma. I am too. But sometimes being scared isn't a good enough reason to run. Mara opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. Because he was right. She was scared, terrified, actually, of owing someone, of being vulnerable, of trusting again. Victor had beaten the ability to trust right out of her, and the weeks of rejection that followed had only reinforced the lesson. But Thomas was also right that fear wasn't a good enough reason to put her children back on that road. The door opened behind them, and Jonah stepped out. He looked between mother and son, clearly reading the tension in the air. I don't mean to interrupt, but breakfast is getting cold. And Mrs. Collins, there's something I'd like to discuss with you. Of course. Mara's voice came out strained. Thomas, go inside and get your siblings ready to leave. Ma? Go. Thomas went, but the look he gave her was pure betrayal. Mara felt it like a knife between her ribs. She and Jonah stood on the porch in silence for a moment. Finally, he spoke. I'm not good at talking around things, so I'm just going to be direct. I'd like you and your children to stay on at the ranch. Not as guests, as workers. He held up a hand before she could protest. Hear me out. This place is too much for one man to run properly. I need help, real help, not charity. Thomas is old enough to do real ranch work, and I saw how he handled himself yesterday. He's got a good head on his shoulders. The younger children can help with smaller tasks, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, things like that. And you, he paused, you strike me as someone who knows how to run a household. Cook, clean, mend, all of it. I've been living like a bachelor for 4 years, and it shows. Mara stared at him. You're offering us work. I'm offering you a fair exchange. You work, I provide room and board, and a small wage on top of that if you're willing. Nothing fancy, but enough to start saving for whatever comes next. Why? The question burst out of her. Why would you do this? You don't know us. We could be thieves, liars, anything. Jonah's gray-green eyes held hers steadily. Could be. But I don't think you are. I think you're a woman who's had a run of bad luck and is trying to do right by her children. I think you're proud and stubborn and scared to death of accepting help. And I think... He looked out over his ranch, his expression distant. I think this house has been too quiet for too long. I think maybe we both need this. I can't promise how long we'll stay. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for honest work for honest pay. You stay as long as it works for both of us. The day it doesn't, you're free to go. No hard feelings, no obligations. It was too good to be true. Had to be. Nothing in Mara's recent experience had prepared her for this kind of straightforward kindness. There had to be a catch, a hidden price, something. But looking at Jonah Mercer's weathered face, she couldn't see deception. Just a lonely man offering work to people who desperately needed it. 1 month, she heard herself say. We'll try it for 1 month. If it's not working out for either of us, we part ways. Fair? Fair. Jonah extended his hand and Mara shook it. His grip was firm, calloused, honest. The handshake of a man who kept his word. They went back inside to find all 6 children seated at the table, clearly having been listening at the door. Grace's face was alight with hope, while Thomas tried to hide his relief behind a mask of teenage indifference. We're staying, Mara announced, for 1 month. We'll be working for Mr. Mercer, Jonah, to earn our keep. That means everyone pulls their weight. No complaining, no slacking. We're not guests here. We're workers, understood? A chorus of yes, ma'am, answered her, and Grace actually squealed with delight. Good. Now eat your breakfast before it gets cold. The meal was a louder affair than the night before, the children's excitement bubbling over into chatter and laughter. Jonah watched them with an expression that was equal parts bemused and melancholy, and Mara wondered what he was thinking. Did he regret his offer already? Was the noise and chaos of 6 children too much after 4 years of solitude? But he caught her looking and gave her a small nod, as if to say it was all right, as if to say he'd meant what he said. After breakfast, Jonah laid out the work assignments. Thomas would help him with the fence repairs in the north pasture. Samuel would learn how to care for the horses, feeding, grooming, mucking stalls. The twins would be on chicken duty, collecting eggs and making sure the birds were fed and watered. Lily would help in the vegetable garden, which had been sadly neglected, and Grace, being the youngest, would help her mother with household chores. "What about you?" Jonah asked Mara. "You feel up to tackling the house?" "I'll be honest, I've let things slide. The kitchen's functional, but the rest—" He shrugged apologetically. "I can handle it." Mara looked around the kitchen, already cataloging what needed doing. The stove needed a deep clean, the floors needed scrubbing, the windows were covered in dust. It was months' worth of neglect, maybe years. But it was honest work, and she'd never been afraid of that. They dispersed to their various tasks, and Mara found herself alone in the house with Grace. Her youngest daughter looked up at her with those impossibly blue eyes. "Mama, are we really staying for a whole month?" "We really are, baby." "And Mr. Jonah won't make us leave?" "Not unless we stop working hard." Grace nodded solemnly, then threw her arms around Mara's waist. "I'm going to work so hard, Mama. The hardest ever. I won't let him send us away." Mara held her daughter close, fighting back tears. "I know you will, sweetheart. Now how about you start by helping me strip these beds? We'll wash all the linens and put on fresh ones." They worked through the morning, and Mara found a strange peace in the simple, repetitive tasks. Washing dishes, sweeping floors, shaking out rugs, these were things she knew how to do, things she was good at. There was no uncertainty here, no fear of rejection, just clean work that showed immediate results. Grace proved to be a cheerful helper, chattering constantly as they worked. She told Mara about the bathroom upstairs, about the miracle of indoor plumbing, about how Lily had found a whole family of mice living in the barn and wanted to keep them as pets. Around midday, Mara made sandwiches and lemonade, carrying them out to where Jonah and Thomas were working on the fence. She found them deep in conversation, Thomas holding posts steady while Jonah hammered. Her son's face was red from exertion, his shirt soaked with sweat, but he was smiling. "Lunch!" she called out, and both males looked up gratefully. They sat in the shade of an old oak tree, and Mara watched as Thomas and Jonah fell easily back into their discussion about the best way to string barbed wire. Her son was soaking up Jonah's knowledge like a sponge, asking question after question, and Jonah answered each one with patience. "Your boy's a natural," Jonah said to her at one point. "Got good instincts for the work." Thomas beamed at the praise, and Mara felt her heart squeeze. This was what he'd been missing, a man's guidance, a father's approval. James had been gone 6 months, but the hole he'd left was still raw and gaping. "He had a good teacher," she said quietly. "His father was a good man." "I can tell." Jonah's eyes held understanding. "The boy honors his memory with the way he works." After lunch, Mara returned to the house and tackled the sitting room. She found photographs on the mantel, a young woman with kind eyes and dark hair, a little girl maybe Grace's age with the same smile. Jonah's lost family. Mara dusted the frames carefully, respectfully, and set them back in their places. This was what grief looked like, she thought. Not the wild, raw pain she'd felt in the first weeks after James died, but this quiet, steady ache. The daily choice to keep their memory alive while still moving forward. By the time the sun started its descent toward the horizon, Mara had cleaned the entire downstairs and started on the upstairs hallway. Grace had tired out and fallen asleep on the freshly made bed in the girls' room. The house smelled of lemon oil and soap, and light streamed through newly washed windows. She heard voices outside and looked out to see her children gathered around Jonah by the barn. He was showing them something, she couldn't quite see what, and they were all leaning in with rapt attention. Even Thomas, who'd been trying so hard to seem grown-up lately, looked like the boy he still was. Samuel must have said something funny because Jonah threw his head back and laughed, a real, genuine laugh that transformed his usually serious face. The children laughed too, and the sound carried across the yard like music. Mara leaned against the window frame, watching. One day, she told herself. They'd been here one day, and already the children looked different, lighter somehow, as if the constant weight of fear and hunger had begun to lift from their small shoulders. Was it really so wrong to want this for them? Was it pride or wisdom that made her want to run? She didn't have answers, but for the first time in a long time, she had hope. And maybe that was enough for now. Dinner that night was a lively affair. The children talked over each other, sharing stories from their day. Michael and Matthew had found 17 eggs. 17! Samuel had learned how to curry a horse properly, and the mare he'd worked with had nuzzled his shoulder in approval. Lily reported that the garden had tomatoes as big as my fist that would be ready to pick soon, and Grace announced that she and Mama had washed every window in the house, and you could see right through them now, clear as anything. Jonah listened to all of this with what Mara was beginning to recognize as his version of pleasure. A small smile, quiet attention, the occasional encouraging question. He wasn't a man of many words, but he was present in a way that mattered. After dinner, as Mara was washing dishes and the children were settling in the sitting room, Jonah appeared at her elbow. "You did good work today," he said. "House looks better than it has in years." "Thank you. The children did well too." "They did." He picked up a dish towel and started drying plates without being asked. Thomas especially. Boy's got real potential as a rancher, if that's the path he wants. Mara scrubbed at a stubborn bit of food, using the motion to cover her emotional response. He loved working with his father, loved learning about the land and animals. I think he's been grieving that loss as much as losing James himself. Well, he's welcome to learn here. All of them are. I meant what I said. This arrangement works for both of us. They worked in companionable silence for a while. Then Jonah spoke again, his voice careful. "I know you said 1 month, and I'll hold to that if that's what you need, but Mrs. Collins, Mara, I want you to know that if it works out, there's no end date on the offer. You and yours can stay as long as you want, as long as you need." Mara's hands stilled in the wash water. "That's generous. Maybe too generous. It's not generosity, it's practicality. I need help. You need a home seems like a fair trade to me. And if the children get too loud, too chaotic, if you decide quiet was better after all, then I'll tell you, honest, no games, no hints. I'll speak plain, and I expect you to do the same." He set down the dish he'd been drying and looked at her directly. "I know you've been burned, know you've got reason not to trust, but I'm asking you to try. Give this a real chance, not just a month to see if I'll turn mean or demand something you can't give. Give it a real chance." Mara met his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity there. This man who'd lost everything and somehow still had enough heart left to open his home to strangers. This man who asked for nothing but honest work and gave everything in return. "I'll try," she whispered. "I promise, I'll try. That's all I'm asking." He picked up another dish. "Now tell me what supplies you need for the house. I'll make a run into town tomorrow, and I want to make sure you've got what you need." They made a list together. Flour, sugar, fabric for new curtains, seeds for the garden, oil for the lamps. Normal domestic things. The kinds of things that built a life rather than just survived one. Later, after the children were in bed and the house had settled into quiet, Mara stood on the back porch and looked up at the stars. They were so bright out here, away from any town lights. Thousands of them scattered across the black sky like spilled salt. The back door opened and Jonah joined her carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one without a word, and they stood together in the darkness, drinking and listening to the night sounds. Crickets chirping, cattle settling, the wind whispering through the grass. "It's peaceful here," Mara said finally. "It is. Took me a while to appreciate it after I lost them. For a long time the quiet just felt empty, but eventually I came to value it. The peace." He paused. "Though I'll admit, hearing children's laughter again today, that was something I didn't know I'd missed. They're good children. They've been through a lot, but they're still good." "They are. You've done well with them, raising them on your own these past months." "I almost didn't." The confession slipped out before Mara could stop it. "Yesterday, when I fell on that road, I thought that was it. I thought I'd finally failed them completely." "But you didn't. You got them here. You kept them safe. You got them here. If you hadn't come along—" "But I did. That's what matters." Jonah's voice was gentle, but firm. "No point dwelling on what might have been. We deal with what is." Mara sipped her coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground her. Why did you really take us in? The truth. Jonah was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. When my wife and daughter got sick, I rode for the doctor. 3 hours there, 3 hours back. By the time I got home with him, they were both gone. And I kept thinking, if someone had helped me sooner, if someone had been there, maybe I could have saved them. Maybe those 6 hours wouldn't have mattered. But no one was there, I was alone, and I lost them. He stopped, composing himself. When I heard your little girl crying that nobody wanted you, I heard my daughter's voice, asking why Daddy couldn't make them better, why no one could help. And I thought, this time, someone's here. This time, I can be the help that should have come. He looked at Mara. So yes, I'm helping you, but you're helping me too, giving me a chance to be the person I needed when I needed them most. Mara's throat tightened with unshed tears. Thank you, she managed, for being honest, for all of it. You're welcome. He drained his coffee cup. Now you should get some sleep. Tomorrow's another work day, and there's plenty to be done. Jonah? She stopped him as he turned to go inside. This month we agreed to? Let's make it 2. I think we both need to know this is real before we make any permanent decisions. A slow smile crossed his face. 2 months it is. Good night, Mara. Good night. She stayed on the porch a while longer, watching the stars and thinking about second chances, about how sometimes the worst moments led to the best ones, about how grace could arrive in the most unexpected packages, like a quiet rancher on a dusty road, offering water to strangers. The future was still uncertain. Victor was still out there somewhere, and winter would come eventually, bringing its own challenges. There were 1,000 things that could still go wrong, but tonight, her children slept safely in real beds. Tonight, they had full stomachs and clean clothes and hope for tomorrow. And tonight, for the first time since James died, Mara let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they were going to be all right. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal, almost like the life Mara had once known before everything fell apart. She woke each morning to the sound of the rooster crowing and the smell of coffee brewing. Jonah always rose before dawn, starting the day with quiet efficiency. By the time she made it downstairs, he'd have the stove going and the coffee hot, and they'd share those first peaceful moments before the children woke and the day's chaos began. Thomas had taken to ranch work like he'd been born to it. Each evening at dinner, he'd talk about what he'd learned, how to recognize when a cow was about to calve, the best way to repair a broken wagon wheel, where the sweetest grass grew in the south pasture. His hands developed new calluses, his shoulders broadened from the physical labor, and the lost look that had haunted his eyes since his father's death began to fade. Samuel discovered a gift with the horses. The animals responded to his gentle touch and quiet voice in ways that surprised even Jonah. The old mare that had been skittish and difficult followed Samuel around the corral like a loyal dog, and the new colt they were training to saddle would calm instantly when Samuel spoke to him. The twins had turned chicken duty into a competitive sport, racing each morning to see who could collect the most eggs. Michael currently held the record at 23 in one day, but Matthew was determined to beat it. Their rivalry kept them busy and mostly out of trouble, though Lily had complained that their running was scaring the hens. Lily herself had developed a real talent for gardening. Under Jonah's patient instruction, she learned which plants needed more water, which ones attracted beneficial insects, how to tell when vegetables were ripe for picking. The neglected garden plot had transformed into neat rows of thriving plants, and Mara's pantry was beginning to fill with preserves and pickled vegetables. And Grace, sweet Grace, who'd sobbed that nobody wanted them, had bloomed like a flower after rain. She followed Mara everywhere, learning to cook and clean and mend, but more importantly, she laughed again. Real laughter, the kind that came from deep in her belly and made her whole face light up. Mara herself had found unexpected satisfaction in running Jonah's household. The house had transformed under her care. Curtains she'd sewn hung in every window. The floors gleamed from daily sweeping and weekly scrubbing. The pantry was organized, the linens were pressed, and meals appeared on the table at regular times. It was the kind of domestic order she'd maintained in her own home with James, and returning to it felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she'd thought lost forever. More surprising was the easy companionship that had developed between her and Jonah. They worked well together, anticipating each other's needs without extensive discussion. When she ran low on firewood, he'd have more chopped and stacked before she had to ask. When he tore his work shirt on barbed wire, she'd have it mended and returned to his room before morning. They'd developed a quiet partnership built on mutual respect and honest work. Sometimes, in the evenings after the children were in bed, they'd sit on the porch together and talk. Not about anything profound, just the small details of daily life. He'd tell her about the new fence line he was planning or the cattle he was thinking of buying. She'd share stories about the children's latest antics or ask his advice about the garden. These conversations were comfortable, unhurried, and Mara found herself looking forward to them more than she wanted to admit. 6 weeks into their stay, on a Thursday afternoon thick with late July heat, everything changed. Mara was in the kitchen making preserves, the air sweet with the scent of cooking strawberries. Grace sat at the table stringing beans, humming tunelessly to herself. Through the open window, Mara could hear the twins arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up. A visitor wasn't unusual. Neighboring ranchers occasionally stopped by, or someone from town needing to speak with Jonah. But something about these hoofbeats made the hair on the back of Mara's neck stand up. They were coming fast, purposeful, and there was more than one horse. Grace must have sensed her mother's tension because she stopped humming. "Mama?" "It's all right, baby. Probably just someone looking for Jonah." But Mara was already moving toward the window, wiping her hands on her apron. 3 men on horseback were approaching the house. The one in front rode a black gelding that looked expensive, and he sat in the saddle with the confidence of someone who expected the world to bend to his will. Even at a distance, even after 6 months, Mara would have recognized that bearing anywhere. Victor Collins had found them. The wooden spoon slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not when they'd finally found safety, finally found peace. "Grace," she said, proud that her voice came out steady despite the terror flooding her system. "Go upstairs and get your brothers and sisters. Tell them to stay in their rooms no matter what they hear. Understand?" "But Mama, now Grace, quickly!" Her daughter must have heard something in her tone because she dropped the beans and ran for the stairs without further argument. Mara heard her calling for her siblings, heard the thunder of feet as they gathered. She moved to the door and stepped out onto the porch, just as the 3 men dismounted. Victor hadn't changed, still handsome in a cold, sharp way with light brown hair and eyes like chips of ice. He was dressed well, better than a farmer should be able to afford, and Mara knew exactly where that money had come from. Her farm, her livestock, her husband's tools and equipment, all sold off to line Victor's pockets. The 2 men with him were strangers, but they had the look of hired muscle, big, hard-faced men who'd been paid to intimidate. "Well, well," Victor said, his voice smooth as oil. "There you are, Mara. You've led me on quite a chase." "What do you want, Victor?" She stayed on the porch, using the elevation to maintain some small advantage. "Want? I want what's rightfully mine. What you stole when you ran off in the night like a thief." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My brother's children? My family's future. You had no right to take them." "They're my children. I had every right." "Did you?" "Interesting interpretation of the law." He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "I have here a legal document, signed by Judge Morrison, granting me guardianship of James's children. You, my dear sister-in-law, have been deemed an unfit mother." The words hit like a physical blow. Mara gripped the porch railing to keep herself upright. That's a lie. No judge wouldn't they? An unstable widow dragging 6 children across the countryside with no money and no prospects? Living in sin with a man not her husband? He gestured toward the house, his meaning clear. It wasn't difficult to convince the judge that the children would be better off under proper male supervision. "I'm not living in sin. I work here. We all work here. It's a legitimate arrangement, is it?" Victor's smile widened. "Do you have a written contract? Any formal documentation of this supposed employment? Or did you simply move yourself and your children into a stranger's home and hope no one would ask questions?" Mara's stomach dropped. They didn't have a contract. It had never occurred to either her or Jonah to formalize their arrangement. They'd sealed it with a handshake and honest intentions. never imagining they'd need legal proof. I see from your face that you don't, Victor continued. How convenient. Well, it doesn't matter now. The judge has ruled. The children are coming with me. You can come too, if you'd like. I'm still willing to make you my wife, Mara. Still willing to do the honorable thing. Honorable? The word came out as a snarl. There's nothing honorable about you, Victor Collins. You beat me. You threatened my children. You drove us from our home. Your home. He laughed. It was never your home. It was Collins' family property, and it should have gone to me when my brother died. You had no legal claim to it. I had James's will. A will that mysteriously disappeared in the chaos after his death. Without it, the farm defaulted to the next male heir. That's the law, Mara. I didn't make it. I just followed it. Mara wanted to fly at him, to claw that smug expression off his face. But she forced herself to stay still, to think. Victor had always been clever with words, always able to twist truth into lies, and lies into truth. He'd found some corrupt judge to sign false papers, and now he was here to take everything from her again. Not this time. She wouldn't let him. Couldn't let him. The children aren't going anywhere with you, she said firmly. I don't care what fake documents you've brought. They're staying here. I'm afraid that's not your decision to make. Victor nodded to his two companions, and they started toward the porch. The sound of a rifle being cocked froze everyone in place. That's far enough. Jonah's voice came from the side of the house. He stepped into view holding his Winchester, the weapon trained steadily on Victor's chest. His face was hard, colder than Mara had ever seen it. This is a private matter, Victor said, though some of his confidence had slipped. Between family. This is my property, Jonah countered, and the lady just told you to leave, so I suggest you mount up and ride out before there's trouble. Are you threatening me? I'm informing you. There's a difference. Jonah moved closer, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. Now, I don't know who you are or what your business is with Mrs. Collins, but she's made it clear she wants nothing to do with you. That's good enough for me. Victor's face flushed with anger. I have legal documents. Don't care. This is my land, and I'm telling you to leave it. You can take your papers and your hired thugs and get off my property. Now. For a moment, Mara thought Victor might actually back down. But then his expression hardened, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing his options, trying to determine if Jonah would actually shoot. Very well, Victor said finally. We'll leave. But this isn't over, Mara. I'll be back with the sheriff and proper authority. And when I return, you won't have a choice. He swung back into his saddle, his movements sharp with barely controlled rage. Enjoy your temporary freedom. It won't last long. He wheeled his horse around and spurred it into a gallop, his two men following close behind. They disappeared down the road in a cloud of dust, and silence fell over the yard. Mara's legs gave out. She sank onto the porch steps, her whole body shaking with reaction. Jonah lowered the rifle and came to sit beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his solid presence. You all right? He asked quietly. No. The word came out as a sob. No, I'm not all right. He found us. He actually found us. Who is he? My brother-in-law, Victor Collins, James's younger brother. The story poured out of her in a rush. The farm, the will that disappeared, Victor's proposal and the violence that followed her rejection, the desperate flight in the middle of the night. All of it, everything she'd been holding back since they arrived. Jonah listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Those papers he had, he said finally. You think they're real? I don't know, maybe. Victor has connections, money. He could have bribed a judge, forged signatures, or the documents could be complete fabrications. There's no way to know without seeing them up close. She looked at Jonah, fear making her voice shake. What if he comes back with the sheriff? What if he really can take them? Then we fight it, legally, properly. But Mara, you need to understand something. If he comes back with law on his side, I can't just shoot him, much as I might want to. I know. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I know, and I can't ask you to risk your ranch, your reputation, fighting my battles. This isn't your problem. Stop. Jonah's voice was firm. You're not going through this alone. Those children have been living under my roof for 6 weeks. I've watched them grow and heal. I'll be damned if I let some snake of a man drag them back into abuse and misery. But if he has legal documents, then we'll get our own legal documents. We'll go to town tomorrow, talk to a real lawyer, find out what our options are. There are good judges in this state, honest ones. We'll find one and present your case properly. Mara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the law could protect them. But her experience had taught her that laws were written by men and enforced by men, and men could be bought or bullied or swayed by whoever told the most convincing story. The door opened behind them, and Thomas appeared. His face was pale but determined. "Ma, I heard everything. He's not taking us. I won't let him." "Thomas, I mean it. I'm big enough to fight now, old enough to testify if it comes to that. And I'll tell any judge who'll listen what Uncle Victor did to you, what he said he'd do to us if we didn't cooperate." Mara's heart broke and swelled at the same time. Her boy, trying so hard to be the man of the family. "Baby, this isn't your fight." "Yes, it is. We're a family. We fight together." He looked at Jonah. "Right?" Jonah met the boy's eyes and nodded slowly. "Right. We fight together." The other children had crept downstairs during the conversation, and now they clustered around their mother. Grace climbed into her lap despite being almost too big for it. The twins pressed against her sides. Samuel put his hand on her shoulder. Even Lily, usually so independent, leaned against Thomas for support. "I'm scared, Mama," Grace whispered. "I know, baby. Me too. But we're safe here, right? Mr. Jonah won't let that bad man take us?" Mara looked at Jonah over her daughter's head, and he looked back steadily. In his eyes, she saw determination and anger and something else, a protectiveness that took her breath away. "No one's taking you anywhere," he said firmly, speaking to Grace but including all the children in his gaze. "This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be, and I protect what's mine." The words settled over them like a blanket, warm and reassuring. The children relaxed fractionally, trusting in the promise of this man who'd become so important to them in such a short time. But Mara knew better. She'd trusted before and been betrayed, had believed in safety only to have it ripped away. Victor was clever and ruthless, and he wouldn't give up easily. Not when there was money to be gained from controlling her children's inheritance, not when there was pride at stake in bending her to his will. That night, after the children were finally settled, though it took longer than usual, with Grace refusing to sleep alone and the twins insisting on pushing their beds together, Mara and Jonah sat at the kitchen table making plans. "We'll ride into town at first light," Jonah said. "There's a lawyer there, Mason Burke. He's honest, doesn't play games. If anyone can help us navigate this, it's him." "What if Victor gets to him first? What if he's already been there, spreading lies?" "Then Burke will tell us, and we'll find someone else." "Mara, you can't think like that. Can't assume everyone's corrupt." "Can I?" She laughed bitterly. "Everyone else has been. The townspeople who turned us away, the store owners who wouldn't sell us food, the neighbors who looked the other way when Victor beat me." "I didn't turn you away." Jonah's voice was quiet but intense. "I looked at you and your children, and I saw people who needed help. And I helped. Not everyone's rotten, Mara. There's still good in this world, still people who do the right thing." She wanted to believe him, desperately wanted to trust that somewhere out there was a lawyer who'd care about justice more than money, a judge who couldn't be bought, a system that would protect the vulnerable instead of victimizing them further. But want and belief were two different things. "I should leave," she said suddenly. "Take the children and go tonight, before Victor comes back. Head further west, maybe north into Kansas. We could disappear and live how?" Jonah leaned forward. "Running from town to town, always looking over your shoulder? That's no life for those children. No life for you. It's better than having them dragged back to Victor." "Is it? Really?" His gray-green eyes held hers. "Or is it just trading one kind of fear for another? Mara, you can run for the rest of your life, or you can stand and fight. Make your choice." The challenge in his words stung. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one who'll lose everything if this goes wrong." "You think I have nothing to lose?" Jonah's voice rose slightly, an edge of anger creeping in. You think I haven't come to care about those children upstairs? That watching Thomas learn to be a man, seeing Samuel's gift with horses, listening to Grace's laughter, you think none of that matters to me? Mara stared at him, shocked by the raw emotion in his voice. I told you my house was too quiet, he continued, his words coming faster now. I told you it needed voices and life. Well, you brought that. You and your children brought my home back to life, so don't tell me I have nothing to lose. Don't tell me this isn't my fight too. Jonah, we stand together or we fall separately. That's the truth of it. So make your choice, Mara Collins. Run or stay and fight. But know that if you stay, you're not alone. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Mara thought about Grace sleeping upstairs, finally secure enough to close her eyes without fear. About Thomas, who'd found a mentor and purpose again. About all her children, who'd bloomed in this place like flowers in good soil. Could she really uproot them again? Drag them back into the uncertainty of the road when they'd finally found something resembling home? If we stay and fight, she said slowly, we do it legal and proper, no violence, no matter what Victor does or says. I won't have blood on my conscience, and I won't put you at risk of losing your ranch. Agreed? And if the law sides with him, if a judge rules that he has guardianship, we accept it and find another way. We don't make ourselves criminals. Jonah's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Agreed, though I reserve the right to appeal to every judge in Oklahoma Territory if necessary. A ghost of a smile crossed Mara's face. Fair enough. They shook hands across the table, sealing their pact. But when Jonah would have released her hand, Mara held on, needing the contact, the reassurance of his solid presence. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for taking us in, for protecting us, for caring. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You already have. Jonah's thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so gentle and unexpected that it made her breath catch. Every day, in 100 small ways. You've given me back my home, Mara. Given me purpose again. That's payment enough. They sat there in the lamplight, hands clasped, two wounded souls finding unexpected strength in each other. And for just a moment, Mara let herself imagine a future where this could last, where Victor's threats came to nothing, where she and her children could truly belong here, where the tentative connection between her and Jonah could grow into something more. But then reality crashed back in. Victor was out there, plotting and planning. Tomorrow they'd ride into town and try to build a legal defense from nothing. Tomorrow they'd face whatever new nightmare he'd concocted. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. Tonight, though, she had this: the warmth of Jonah's hand in hers, the quiet house settling around them, her children safe upstairs. Tonight, they had peace. She held on to it with everything she had, knowing how fragile it was, how easily it could shatter. But for now, for this moment, it was enough. Dawn came too quickly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed almost mocking in their beauty. Mara had barely slept, lying awake in her room listening to every creak of the house, every rustle of wind, half expecting Victor to return in the night with a mob at his back. But the hours passed quietly, and when she finally gave up on sleep and went downstairs, she found Jonah already dressed and waiting, 2 horses saddled and ready in the yard. Coffee's hot, he said, nodding toward the pot on the stove. And I left instructions with Thomas. He's in charge while we're gone. Mara poured herself a cup, her hands unsteady enough that the liquid sloshed slightly. You think it's wise leaving them here alone? What if Victor comes back? I asked the Johnsons to check in. Dan Johnson owes me a favor, and he's bringing his 2 oldest boys with him. They'll be here within the hour. Jonah pulled on his coat despite the already warming air. Victor won't try anything with witnesses around. He's too smart for that. It was cold comfort, but comfort nonetheless. Mara went upstairs to check on the children one last time before they left. She found them all awake, gathered in the boys' room like refugees huddled together for warmth. We'll be back before supper, she told them, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. Thomas, you're in charge. Keep everyone close to the house. Don't go wandering off to the far pastures or the creek. Yes, ma'am. Thomas stood straighter, accepting the responsibility. We'll be fine, Ma. You just worry about getting things settled with that lawyer. Grace threw her arms around Mara's waist. You're coming back, right? You promise? The question broke Mara's heart. That her children had to ask, had to seek reassurance about something so basic, spoke volumes about what they'd been through. I promise, baby. Wild horses couldn't keep me away from you. The ride into town took nearly 2 hours. Mara and Jonah spoke little, both lost in their own thoughts. The landscape rolled past, endless grassland punctuated by the occasional farmhouse or windmill, cattle grazing in pastures, hawks circling overhead. It should have been peaceful, but Mara's nerves were wound so tight she felt like a violin string ready to snap. The town of Cooperton was bigger than the last few places Mara had tried, with an actual main street lined with businesses, a bank, a general store, a hotel, and tucked between the land office and a dress shop, the office of Mason Burke, attorney at law. They tied their horses to the rail outside, and Jonah held the door open for Mara. The office was small but tidy, lined with law books and filing cabinets. A young clerk sat at a desk near the door, and behind him, through an open doorway, Mara could see a man working at a larger desk. "Help you folks?" the clerk asked, looking up from his ledger. "Need to see Mr. Burke," Jonah said. "It's urgent." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but—" "Mr. Burke is very busy. I can schedule you for next Thursday. Tell him it's about guardianship fraud and forged legal documents." Mara's voice came out sharper than she intended. "Tell him a woman and 6 children are about to lose everything to a man who beats women and threatens children. See if he's too busy for that." The clerk's eyes widened. Before he could respond, the man from the inner office appeared in the doorway. He was perhaps 50, with gray threading through his dark hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "I'm Mason Burke," he said, "and I'm never too busy for a case like that. Please come in." His office was even more crowded with books than the outer room. Legal volumes were stacked on every surface, and papers covered his desk in what appeared to be organized chaos. He cleared 2 chairs and gestured for them to sit. "Now then," he said, settling behind his desk. "Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out." So Mara told the story again. Her husband's death, Victor's appearance and his violence, the missing will, their flight and the weeks of wandering, Jonah's rescue, and finally Victor's appearance yesterday with his claimed guardianship papers. Burke listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes on a pad of paper. When she finished, he sat back and steepled his fingers. "This Judge Morrison, who supposedly signed the guardianship order. Do you know where he presides?" "No, Victor didn't say, and I was too shocked to ask." Well, that's interesting because there is no Judge Morrison currently sitting in Oklahoma Territory. There was one, but he died 3 years ago." Burke's expression hardened. "Which means those papers your brother-in-law showed you are either very old or complete forgeries." Relief flooded through Mara so intensely she felt dizzy. "So he can't take the children? He has no legal claim?" "Not based on what you've told me, no. However," Burke held up a hand, tempering her hope, "the issue of your husband's estate is more complicated. Without the will and with no written contract establishing your employment arrangement with Mr. Mercer here, Victor could potentially make a case that you're unfit. Not because of any moral failing, but because you have no stable means of support." "But she does have stable support," Jonah interjected. "She works for me. Has been for 6 weeks now. The arrangement is verbal, I assume? No written contract, no formal documentation?" Jonah's silence was answer enough. Burke sighed. "That's what I thought. Look, I believe you both. I can see this as a legitimate arrangement, but if this goes before a judge, Victor's lawyer, and he will have a lawyer, will paint Mrs. Collins as a vagrant who imposed on your charity. They'll question the propriety of the situation, hint at scandal. It won't matter that it's untrue. They'll create enough doubt to make their case." "So what do we do?" Mara asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "There must be something—" "There is." Burke leaned forward. "We make the arrangement formal and unquestionable. Mr. Mercer, are you willing to employ Mrs. Collins as your housekeeper under a written contract, with specified wages, duties, and living arrangements for her and her children?" "Of course. I'll sign whatever you need." "Good. That's step 1. Step 2 is more complicated." Burke turned to Mara. "Your husband's will. You said it disappeared after his death. Did anyone else know about it? A lawyer who drew it up, perhaps? A witness to the signing?" Mara thought back, trying to remember. It had been 5 years ago when Grace was born, and James had decided they needed to formalize things. There was a lawyer in our old town, Henderson, I think his name was. Samuel Henderson, and I think maybe our neighbor, Mr. Carver, witnessed it. He and James were close friends. Do you remember what the will said, the specific language? It left everything to me. The farm, the equipment, everything. James was very clear about that. He said his children should be raised by their mother, not bounced between relatives. Her voice cracked slightly. He knew what his brother was like, even then. Burke made more notes. If we can find Henderson or Carver, or better yet, if Henderson kept a copy of the will in his files, we can challenge Victor's claim to the estate. It won't get you the farm back. That ship has sailed, I'm afraid. But it would establish that James's wishes were for you to have guardianship and control. How long will all this take? Jonah asked. Depends on how cooperative people are and how hard Victor fights. Could be weeks, could be months. In the meantime, I'll draw up an employment contract today and have it notarized. That should provide some immediate protection. Burke stood, extending his hand. I'll need a retainer, $50 to start. Mara's heart sank. $50. She didn't have 50 cents to her name, but Jonah was already reaching for his wallet. 50 now, and whatever else you need as we go. I want this handled properly, Burke. No stone unturned. You have my word. Burke shook both their hands. Now there's one more thing we should discuss. If Victor does try to force the issue, if he shows up with the sheriff and those fake papers, don't resist. Don't give him any excuse to claim you're breaking the law. You send for me immediately, and you let me handle it legally. And if the sheriff sides with Victor before you can get there, Mara asked, then you go peacefully and trust me to get you back. I know that's asking a lot, Mrs. Collins, but fighting will only make things worse. His expression softened. I've been practicing law for 26 years. I've seen men like your brother-in-law before. They're bullies who rely on intimidation and the assumption that their victims won't fight back. Well, you're fighting back now, and I promise you, we're going to win. They left the office with the promise that Burke would have the employment contract ready by the next day. Jonah insisted they stay in town for lunch, partly because it was nearly noon, but mostly, Mara suspected, to give her time to settle her nerves before the ride home. They ate at a small restaurant near the hotel, and Mara forced down food she couldn't taste while her mind raced through possibilities and worst-case scenarios. What if Victor came back before they got the contract signed? What if he'd already gone to the old town and gotten to Henderson or Carver first? What if... Stop. Jonah's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. I can hear you thinking from here, and it's not helping anything. I can't help it. There are so many things that could go wrong, and we'll handle them if they do. But sitting here inventing problems that don't exist yet is just torture. He pushed his plate aside and leaned forward. Mara, look at me. She met his eyes, those steady gray-green eyes that had become such a source of comfort. We're going to get through this, he said quietly. All of us, together. You hear me? I want to believe that. Then believe it, because it's true. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher. You asked me once why I helped you, and I told you part of the truth, that I needed help on the ranch, that the house was too quiet. But there's more to it than that. Mara waited, her heart suddenly beating faster. When I lost my wife and daughter, I lost my purpose. Lost my reason for getting up in the morning. For 4 years, I just went through the motions. Working the ranch because it's what I knew how to do, but not caring about it. Not caring about much of anything. He looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred from years of hard work. Then you showed up with those 6 kids, and suddenly the house was full of noise and life again. Suddenly I had a reason to make sure there was good food on the table, to fix the loose board on the porch steps, to care about what happened tomorrow. Jonah, let me finish. He looked up at her again. What I'm trying to say is, this isn't charity. This isn't me being noble or kind. This is me being selfish because I need you and those children as much as you need this ranch. Maybe more. So when I say we're going to fight this and win, I'm not just saying it to make you feel better. I'm saying it because I'm not willing to lose this. To lose you all. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Mara felt tears prick her eyes, but for once they weren't tears of fear or desperation. They were something else entirely, something warm and overwhelming and terrifying in its implications. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that you're not alone. Haven't been since the day I found you on that road." He reached across the table and took her hand, his grip warm and solid. "Whatever happens with Victor, whatever the law says, whatever fights we have ahead, we face them together. Agreed?" "Agreed." The word came out choked with emotion, but she meant it with every fiber of her being. They finished their meal in a silence that was somehow both comfortable and charged with unspoken things. The ride home passed more quickly than the ride in, and as the ranch came into view in the late afternoon sun, Mara felt something in her chest ease. The house looked exactly as they'd left it, peaceful, solid, whole. Home. The children came running out before they'd even dismounted, Grace in the lead and the others close behind. They swarmed around Mara, all talking at once, and she hugged them fiercely, breathing in the smell of sunshine and dust and her babies. "Did you see the lawyer?" Thomas asked. "What did he say?" "He said Victor's papers are fake. There's no Judge Morrison. Hasn't been for 3 years." The relief on her children's faces was almost painful to witness. Samuel actually whooped with joy, and the twins started dancing around in circles. Even Lily cracked a smile. "So we can stay?" Grace asked, looking up at her mother with those impossibly blue eyes. "Really stay?" Mara looked over at Jonah, who was watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. He nodded slightly, and she turned back to her daughter. "Really stay, baby? This is our home now." The celebration that followed was spontaneous and joyful. The children dragged Mara and Jonah into the house, chattering about everything that had happened while they were gone, how Mr. Johnson and his boys had come by and helped Thomas with the fence work, how Samuel had gotten the new colt to take an apple from his hand, how the chickens had laid a record 27 eggs, how Lily had picked the first ripe tomatoes from the garden. Normal things. Beautiful, mundane, everyday things that made a life. That evening, after dinner, and after the children were finally settled in bed, still wound up from the day's emotions but exhausted enough to actually sleep, Mara found herself back on the porch with Jonah. It was becoming their ritual, these quiet moments at the end of the day when they could talk without little ears listening. "Burke should have the contract ready tomorrow," Jonah said. "I'll write in first thing and bring it back for you to sign." "Thank you for paying his retainer, for everything. I'll pay you back, I swear. It might take time, but—" "Mara," he cut her off gently. "Stop trying to turn everything into a debt. This is an investment in our future. In the ranch's future, I don't want to be paid back. But $50 is worth it. You're worth it. Those children are worth it." He turned to face her fully. "When are you going to accept that you have value beyond what you can earn or repay?" The question struck deep. Mara opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, not knowing what to say. When had she started measuring her worth only in terms of what she could do for others? When had she stopped believing she deserved kindness simply for being herself? "I don't know," she admitted finally. "Maybe when James died, or maybe before that, when I was growing up and learned that love always came with conditions. Do this, be that, earn your place. I guess I never learned how to just accept." "Well, it's time you learned." Jonah's voice was soft but firm. "Because those children up there accept you completely, just as you are. And so do I." Mara felt her breath catch. "Jonah, I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving your husband, still finding your feet. I'm not asking for anything, Mara. I'm just telling you the truth." He paused. "I care about you. About all of you. And not just as an employer or a friend. I need you to know that before we go any further down this road. Need you to understand what you mean to me." Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere between pulling you off that dusty road and watching you make this house a home, I started falling for you. Started imagining a future that included all of us, you and me and those 6 beautiful children." He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I'm saying that if you wanted, when you were ready, we could make this arrangement something more permanent than just employment. We could be a real family." The word should have terrified her. Should have sent her running, because the last time she'd trusted a man with her heart, she'd ended up widowed and homeless. But instead, she felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. "I'm not James," Jonah continued when she didn't respond. "I know that. I'm not trying to replace him or make you forget him, but I could be a father to those children, could be a partner to you, could give you all the home and security you deserve, if you wanted that, if you could ever see me that way." Mara looked at this man who'd saved her family, who'd opened his home and his life without hesitation, who was looking at her now with such vulnerable honesty in his eyes. And she realized with startling clarity that she could see him that way, could imagine waking up next to him, building a life with him, growing old on this ranch together. It was too soon. James had only been gone 6 months. She should wait, should grieve properly, should give herself time. But life didn't always allow for should. Sometimes you had to grab onto happiness when it appeared, because waiting for the perfect moment meant missing the real one. "I'm not ready yet," she said slowly. "Not for marriage or anything official. But Jonah, I need you to know that when I think about the future now, you're in it, you and this ranch and the life we're building here. I don't know when I'll be ready for more, but I want you to wait for me, if you're willing." The smile that crossed his face was like sunrise, slow, warm, and full of promise. "I can wait. I've waited 4 years to feel alive again. I can wait a few more months for you to be ready." He took her hand and they sat together in the darkness, fingers intertwined, not saying anything because everything important had already been said. Around them, the ranch settled into night. Cattle lowing in the distance, crickets chirping in the grass, the windmill's steady creak, and inside the house, 6 children sleeping safe and sound. This was peace, Mara thought. This was what home felt like. Not a place, but a feeling of belonging, of being wanted exactly as you were, with all your broken pieces and messy history. Of knowing that tomorrow might bring challenges, but you wouldn't face them alone. Victor was still out there somewhere, plotting his next move. The legal battle was just beginning. There would be hard days ahead, moments of doubt and fear. But tonight, Mara had this. Jonah's hand in hers, her children sleeping peacefully, and for the first time since James died, the belief that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. And that was enough. The next morning brought Mason Burke himself to the ranch, riding up just after breakfast with a leather satchel tucked under his arm. Mara watched from the kitchen window as he dismounted, her stomach tight with nerves despite Jonah's reassuring presence beside her. "That's a good sign," Jonah murmured. "Burke doesn't make house calls for bad news." They met the lawyer on the porch, and Burke wasted no time pulling documents from his satchel. "I have your employment contract here, ready for signatures, but that's not why I came out personally." His expression was grim. "I did some digging yesterday after you left. Your brother-in-law has been busy." Mara's heart sank. "What did he do?" "He went to Sheriff Dawson with those forged papers, claiming you kidnapped the children. Dawson's not the sharpest tool in the shed, and Victor played him like a fiddle, tears about his poor dead brother's children being corrupted by their immoral mother, the whole performance." Burke held up a hand as Mara started to speak. "But here's the thing. Dawson mentioned it to his deputy, who happens to be married to my secretary's sister. Small towns, you understand. Word travels." "So the sheriff believes him?" Jonah's voice was hard. "For now. But I've already filed a complaint with the territorial judge, Martin Hayes. He's a fair man, can't be bought, and he takes a very dim view of forged legal documents. I've requested an emergency hearing for tomorrow afternoon." Burke pulled out more papers. "These are affidavits I need you both to sign, detailing everything you told me yesterday. And I need the children to sign statements too, at least the older ones who can write." "Tomorrow?" Mara felt the walls closing in. "That's so soon." "Better soon than waiting for Victor to make another move. We control the narrative this way. Force his hand before he can manufacture more lies." Burke's eyes were kind but firm. "I know it's frightening, Mrs. Collins, but trust me on this. We want this hearing while the truth is still fresh and clear." They spent the next hour signing documents, with Burke carefully explaining each one. When it came time for the children's statements, Thomas stepped forward without hesitation, his jaw set in that determined way that reminded Mara so much of James. "I remember everything Uncle Victor did," Thomas said, as he signed his name in careful script. "Every threat, every time he hit Ma, every promise he made about what would happen if we didn't cooperate. I'll tell the judge all of it." Samuel signed next, his hand shaking slightly, but his statement clear and detailed. Even the twins, at Burke's gentle prompting, managed to write a few sentences about being scared of their uncle, about running away in the night. Grace watched all of this with wide eyes. "Do I have to write something too?" she asked in a small voice. "Not if you don't want to, little one," Burke said kindly. "But if you feel up to it, your voice matters too." Grace looked at her mother, then at Jonah, then back at Burke. Finally, she nodded. In her careful, childish handwriting, she wrote, "Uncle Victor is mean. He hurt Mama. I don't want to go with him. I want to stay with Mama and Mr. Jonah forever." The simplicity of it brought tears to Mara's eyes. Burke carefully collected all the statements and added them to his satchel. "That's everything I need for now. The hearing is tomorrow at 2 o'clock at the courthouse in Guthrie. That's about a 4-hour ride from here, so you'll need to leave early. I recommend bringing all the children. The judge will want to see them." "All of them?" Mara's voice rose. "Even Grace? She's only 6. "Especially Grace. Judge Hayes has a soft spot for children, and seeing her, seeing all of them healthy and happy and clearly bonded with both of you, will speak louder than any legal argument I can make." Burke stood, preparing to leave. "One more thing. Victor will be there and he'll have representation. Don't let him provoke you. Don't engage with him at all. Let me do the talking." After Burke left, Mara found herself unable to sit still. She cleaned the kitchen that was already clean, reorganized the pantry that was already organized, scrubbed floors that didn't need scrubbing. Jonah finally caught her by the shoulders as she was about to start washing windows for the second time that week. "Stop," he said gently. "You're going to wear yourself out before we even get to the hearing." "I can't help it. I need to do something, need to keep moving, or I'll start thinking about all the ways this could go wrong." "Then let's take a walk. Get out of this house for a bit." He called to Thomas to watch the younger children, and then he and Mara walked out toward the south pasture where wildflowers bloomed in great sweeps of purple and gold. The day was warm but not oppressively hot, and a breeze carried the scent of grass and earth and growing things. They walked in silence for a while, and Mara felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. There was something healing about this land, something that spoke to the deepest parts of her soul. Maybe it was the vastness of it, the way it made human problems seem smaller by comparison. Or maybe it was simply that she'd found peace here, and her body remembered that even when her mind was churning with worry. "Tell me about James," Jonah said suddenly. Mara looked at him in surprise. "What?" "Your husband. You've mentioned him, but you haven't really talked about him. What was he like?" It was the last thing she'd expected him to ask. Most men would have avoided the subject of her dead husband entirely, not wanting to invite comparisons or resurrect ghosts. But Jonah was watching her with genuine interest, and Mara realized he wasn't asking out of jealousy or insecurity. He was asking because James was part of her story, and he wanted to know all of her. "He was kind," she said slowly, reaching back through memory. "Patient with the children, always laughing. He loved to make things with his hands, furniture, toys, little wooden animals for Grace. He'd sing while he worked, completely off-key, and it used to drive me crazy, but now I'd give anything to hear it again." "How did you meet?" "At a barn raising when I was 17. He was helping my father with the roof, and he smiled at me across the yard. And that was it. I was gone." She smiled at the memory, bittersweet but no longer sharp with pain. "We were married 6 months later. Everyone said we were too young, too impulsive, but we proved them wrong. We had 10 good years together before the accident." "He sounds like a good man." "He was. He really was." Mara stopped walking and turned to face Jonah. "But he's gone, and I'm still here. The children are still here. And we need to keep living, keep moving forward. I think—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think James would be glad we found you, would be grateful that someone's taking care of his family the way he would have wanted." Jonah reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "I hope so, because taking care of his family has become the most important thing in my life." They stood there in the field of wildflowers, the sun warm on their faces, and Mara felt something shift inside her. The guilt she'd been carrying, the feeling that caring for Jonah was somehow a betrayal of James, began to ease. James would want her to be happy, would want the children to have a father figure, a stable home, a future. Loving Jonah didn't mean forgetting James. It just meant choosing to live fully in the present rather than dwelling in the past. "When this is over," she said softly, "when Victor is dealt with and the legal matters are settled, I think I'll be ready. For more. For us." Jonah's eyes lit up with hope and something deeper. "You mean that?" "I mean that. You've been patient with me, with all of us. You've given us time to heal and space to breathe. And somewhere along the way, this stopped being just a safe place and started being home. You stopped being just our employer and became," she searched for the right word, "became ours. Part of us." He pulled her into his arms then, and Mara let herself lean into his strength, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. They stood like that for a long moment, two people who'd been broken by loss finding wholeness in each other. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Jonah murmured into her hair, "we face it together. And when it's done, we start building the life we both deserve. Deal?" "Deal." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Mara felt lighter than she had in months. The fear was still there. She'd be foolish not to be afraid of the hearing tomorrow, but it no longer consumed her. Whatever the judge decided, whatever legal hoops they had to jump through, she knew one fundamental truth: she wasn't alone anymore. That evening, she gathered the children after supper to prepare them for the next day. They sat in the parlor, all 6 of them watching her with varying degrees of anxiety. "Tomorrow we're going to see a judge," she began. "He's going to listen to both sides, our side and Uncle Victor's side, and then make a decision about where you children should live." "But we want to live here," Michael said immediately, "with you and Mr. Jonah." "I know, sweetheart, and that's what we're going to tell the judge. Mr. Burke says he's a fair man, someone who will listen to the truth, but I need you all to be brave tomorrow. Can you do that?" 6 heads nodded, some more confidently than others. "What if the judge believes Uncle Victor?" Lily asked, voicing the fear they all shared. "What if he makes us go with him?" Mara exchanged a glance with Jonah, who'd been standing quietly in the doorway. He came forward and knelt down so he was at the children's level. "Then I fight harder," he said simply. "I appeal to every judge in the territory if I have to. I hire more lawyers. I do whatever it takes, because you're not going anywhere you don't want to go. Not while I have breath in my body." The fierce protectiveness in his voice seemed to reassure them. Grace climbed into his lap, and Jonah wrapped his arms around her automatically, like he'd been doing it all her life. "You promise?" Grace asked. "I promise, little one. You're mine now, all of you, and I take care of what's mine." Thomas, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. "What do we call you? At the hearing, I mean. Mr. Mercer seems too formal if we're supposed to be family, but Jonah seems too familiar if we're supposed to be employees," Is says. It was a good question, one that cut to the heart of their ambiguous situation. Jonah looked at Mara, clearly wanting her input before answering. "What do you want to call him?" Mara asked her children. "What feels right to you?" The children looked at each other, having some silent conversation that only siblings could have. Finally, Samuel spoke up. "Could we call you Pa? If that's all right with you, I mean. We know you're not our real Pa, but you've been more of a father to us than Uncle Victor ever was. More even than—" He stopped, looking guilty. "I don't mean to dishonor Dad's memory." "You're not," Mara said quickly, her throat tight with emotion. "Your father would be honored that you found someone worthy of that title." Jonah's eyes were suspiciously bright. "I'd be proud to be called Pa. More proud than you know." His voice roughened. "Your father was a good man who loved you all. I'm not trying to replace him, but if you'll let me, I'll stand in that gap for you. Be the father you need now." Just like that, the last barrier fell away. The children swarmed him, even Thomas abandoning his teenage dignity to join the group hug. Mara watched with tears streaming down her face, witnessing the moment her fractured family became whole again in a completely different form. They all went to bed early that night, knowing the morning would come quickly. But hours later, Mara was still awake, staring at the ceiling and running through worst-case scenarios. What if Victor had bribed Judge Hayes? What if he'd manufactured more evidence? What if... A soft knock on her door interrupted her spiral. "Mara, you awake?" She opened the door to find Jonah standing there in his nightshirt, hair mussed from sleep. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Kept thinking I heard something. Checked on the children twice already. They're all sound asleep. But I can't seem to settle." He ran a hand through his hair. "Mind if I sit with you for a bit? Just until we're both tired enough to sleep?" They ended up in the kitchen with chamomile tea, and the lamp turned low. For a long time they didn't talk, just sat in companionable silence. Then Jonah spoke. "I've been thinking about what happens after tomorrow, assuming things go our way." "What about it?" "I want to adopt them, legally, all 6 of them." He looked at her intently. "I know we haven't made things official between us yet, but I don't want there to be any question about my commitment to those children. I want them to be mine in the eyes of the law, not just in my heart." Mara felt her eyes fill with tears again. It seemed like all she did lately was cry, but these were good tears, healing tears. They'd like that. Having a father again, officially. "And when you're ready, when we make things official between us, I want to do it right. Proper wedding, proper vows, the whole thing. I want everyone to know that you're mine and I'm yours and we're a family. No more questions, no more doubts." "Jonah Mercer, is that a proposal?" "Not yet. When I propose, you'll know it. This is just me letting you know my intentions so you can prepare yourself." His eyes twinkled with gentle humor. "Fair warning and all that." She laughed despite her nerves, and somehow that made everything feel more manageable. If they could still laugh, still plan for the future, then maybe everything really would be all right. They finally made it to bed around 2 in the morning, and what felt like minutes later, the rooster was crowing and the sky was lightening with dawn. Mara woke the children, got everyone dressed in their best clothes, which weren't saying much after weeks of travel, but at least everything was clean and mended. Jonah hitched the wagon, and they set out in the pre-dawn darkness, needing every minute of travel time to reach Guthrie by 2 o'clock. The children were quiet during the ride, the twins actually sitting still for once, sensing the gravity of the day ahead. Grace sat between Mara and Jonah on the wagon seat, her small hand clasped tightly in her mother's. They reached Guthrie with an hour to spare and found Mason Burke waiting on the courthouse steps. He looked them over with an approving nod. "Good. You all look respectable and well cared for. That's important." He knelt down to address the children directly. "Now, the judge may want to ask you some questions. Just tell the truth. Don't exaggerate. Don't guess if you're not sure. If you don't know something, it's okay to say, 'I don't know.' Understood?" The children nodded solemnly. "Mr. Burke?" Thomas stepped forward. "Will Uncle Victor be in there?" "He will. But you don't have to look at him or speak to him. Keep your eyes on the judge or on me. Victor Collins can't hurt you anymore." They filed into the courtroom, a grand space with high ceilings and dark wood paneling that made everyone speak in hushed tones. Victor was already there with his lawyer, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit. When Victor saw them enter, his expression twisted with fury before he managed to school it into something more acceptable. Judge Hayes entered and everyone rose. He was an older man with white hair and shrewd eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He settled behind his bench and gestured for everyone to sit. "All right," he said, his voice carrying easily through the courtroom. "I've reviewed the preliminary documents filed by Mr. Burke. This is an unusual case. Mr. Collins, you claim guardianship of your late brother's children based on documents signed by Judge Morrison. Mr. Burke contends these documents are fraudulent, as Judge Morrison died 3 years ago. Let's start there. Mr. Collins, can you explain how you obtained papers signed by a dead judge?" Victor's lawyer stood quickly. "Your Honor, my client obtained these documents in good faith from a legal clerk in—" "I asked Mr. Collins, not you." Hayes's tone was sharp. "Mr. Collins, stand up and answer the question." Victor rose, and Mara was gratified to see him looking less confident than he had outside. "Your Honor, I may have been mistaken about the judge's name. It's been a difficult time, losing my brother and then having his widow disappear with the children. So you admit the documents may not be legitimate?" That is, I believed them to be legitimate when I presented them to Sheriff Dawson. That's not what I asked. Hayes shuffled through papers on his bench. I have here a death certificate for Judge Theodore Morrison, dated April 1887. I have witness statements from 3 court clerks confirming no guardianship papers were filed in this matter. I have affidavits from Mrs. Collins and her children detailing abuse and threats that drove them from their home. What I don't have is any credible evidence supporting your claim to guardianship. Victor's face was turning red. Those children are Collins' blood. So is their mother by marriage. And her claim supersedes yours unless you can prove unfitness. Can you? She's living in sin with a man not her husband. I have an employment contract right here, signed and notarized yesterday, establishing Mrs. Collins as Mr. Mercer's housekeeper with separate living quarters and specified wages. Try again. Mara felt hope bloom in her chest. Judge Hayes wasn't just fair, he was actively hostile to Victor's claims, cutting through lies with surgical precision. Victor's lawyer tried to recover. Your Honor, even setting aside the guardianship question, there's still the matter of the estate. As the closest male relative, show me the will. The will was lost. Convenient. Hayes turned to Burke. Mr. Burke, do you have evidence regarding the will? I do, Your Honor. I contacted Samuel Henderson, the lawyer who drafted the will in question. He's traveling here now with his copy from his files. He should arrive within the week. Additionally, I have a sworn statement from Robert Carver, who witnessed the will's signing, confirming that it left everything to Mrs. Collins. Hayes made a note. We'll hear Mr. Henderson's testimony when he arrives, but even without the will, Mr. Collins, you have a problem. You claim your brother's property as next of kin, but you sold that property immediately and pocketed the proceeds. By what right did you do that without going through probate? Victor's lawyer was looking increasingly desperate. Common practice in cases where common practice is not legal practice. You jumped the gun, Mr. Collins, and now you're trying to justify it after the fact. Hayes sat back. Let me be clear about what I'm seeing here. A man shows up with forged documents to claim children who are demonstrably afraid of him. He's already illegally disposed of their father's property. His sole motivation appears to be controlling whatever inheritance remains. Am I missing anything? Your Honor, Victor's lawyer tried. I'm not finished. Hayes's voice could have cut glass. Now, I could simply dismiss Mr. Collins's petition and be done with it. But I want to hear from the children. I want to know what they want. He gestured to the children, and they came forward together, holding hands. Thomas stood in front, the others ranged behind him like soldiers. State your names for the record, Hayes said, his tone gentling. They did, one by one. Then Hayes focused on Thomas. You're the oldest? Yes, sir, 14. Tell me about your uncle, in your own words. Thomas took a deep breath. He showed up after Pa died and said the farm was his now. Ma told him Pa had a will leaving everything to her, but Uncle Victor said he couldn't find it. He said Ma should marry him to keep everything in the family. When she said no, Thomas's voice hardened. He hit her. I saw the bruises. And he told me that if I didn't convince Ma to cooperate, he'd make sure none of us had anywhere to go. Did he hit you or your siblings? No, sir, just Ma. But he scared us. The way he looked at her, the way he talked, we knew he'd hurt her worse if we stayed. Hayes made more notes. Then he addressed Samuel. What about you, son? You agree with what your brother said? Yes, sir. Uncle Victor is mean. He made Ma cry. We ran away in the middle of the night because we were scared. One by one, Hayes questioned the children. The twins confirmed Thomas's story. Lily described hearing their mother's sobs through the bedroom walls. And Grace, sweet Grace, climbed right up onto the judge's bench like she was visiting a favorite grandfather and said, We want to stay with Mama and Pa Jonah. They take care of us. Uncle Victor doesn't love us. Pa Jonah does. The courtroom was silent. Even Victor's lawyer seemed at a loss for words. Hayes looked at Grace for a long moment, then gently lifted her down. Thank you, sweetheart. You've been very brave. You can sit down now. He waited until all the children were back in their seats, then turned to Victor. Mr. Collins, I'm going to give you one chance to withdraw your petition gracefully. Because if you don't, I'm going to rule against you and note in the official record that you attempted to use forged documents to gain custody of children who are clearly terrified of you. That record will follow you. It will make it very difficult for you to pursue this matter in any other court. So I suggest you take this opportunity to walk away." Victor stood there, his face mottled with rage and humiliation. For a moment, Mara thought he might actually explode. But his lawyer put a hand on his arm and whispered something urgent. Finally, Victor bit out, "I withdraw my petition." Smart choice. Hayes stamped a document with decisive force. "Petition withdrawn. Custody remains with the mother. Furthermore, I'm ordering that Mr. Victor Collins maintain a distance of at least 100 yards from Mrs. Collins and her children. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. We're done here." He banged his gavel, and just like that, it was over. Mara sat frozen, unable to believe it had been that simple. 6 months of running, weeks of fear, and it ended in less than an hour with Victor slinking out of the courtroom in defeat. Burke was grinning. "That went better than I could have hoped. Hayes really took him apart." "So we're safe?" Mara asked, needing to hear it said. "Really safe. Really safe. Victor has no legal standing, and with the restraining order, he can't come near you. It's done, Mara. You won." The children erupted in cheers, Grace actually jumping up and down. Thomas was grinning wider than Mara had seen since before his father died. And Jonah was looking at her with such pride and relief that it made her heart ache. They celebrated that night at a hotel restaurant in Guthrie, the children giddy with relief and freedom. They ate until they couldn't eat anymore, and for once Mara didn't worry about the cost. This was a moment worth celebrating, worth marking as the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The ride home the next day was completely different from the tense journey there. The children sang songs, played games, pointed out interesting clouds. They were children again, freed from the weight of fear they'd been carrying. As the ranch came into view in the late afternoon sun, Grace turned to Mara with shining eyes. "We're really home, Mama. Really, truly home. We really are, baby." The weeks that followed were filled with paperwork and legal procedures, but the outcome was never in doubt. Samuel Henderson arrived with the will, exactly as James had written it. Judge Hayes officially dismissed all of Victor's claims and awarded Mara full custody. And when Jonah filed adoption papers for all 6 children, they sailed through without objection. Summer faded into autumn, and the ranch took on the golden glow of harvest season. The garden produced more vegetables than they could eat, so Mara started selling the surplus in town. The cattle brought good prices at market. Thomas was handling more and more of the ranch operations, and Jonah began talking about buying adjacent land to expand. On a crisp October evening, Mara stood in the kitchen finishing the supper dishes when she heard the children shrieking with laughter outside. She looked through this window to see Jonah chasing them around the yard, Grace on his shoulders and the others dodging and weaving. He was laughing as hard as they were, and the sound carried through the open window like music. This was what healing looked like, she thought. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of joy strong enough to overwhelm it. Later that night, after the children were in bed, Jonah found her on the porch, their spot, the place where so many important conversations had happened. "Beautiful night," he said, settling beside her. "It is." Mara leaned against him, comfortable with the contact now. "I was thinking today about where we were 6 months ago, about that road where you found us. Feels like a lifetime ago." "It does. Jonah, I need to tell you something." She turned to face him fully. "I'm ready. For more. For us. I don't want to wait anymore." His eyes searched hers. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. You've been patient with me, given me time to heal. But I'm healed now, or at least healed enough. And I don't want to spend another day not being your wife when that's what I want to be." Jonah reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I was hoping you'd say that. Been carrying this around for 3 weeks now, waiting for the right moment." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. Nothing fancy, but perfect. "Mara Collins, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Would you let me be a father to your children and a husband to you? Would you build this life with me officially and permanently?" "Yes." The word came out choked with happy tears. "Yes, to all of it. Yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her hand. Then he kissed her, and it was sweet and gentle and full of promise. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch with Judge Hayes officiating. He'd become something of a friend in the aftermath of the hearing. The children stood with them, all 6 dressed in their best clothes, beaming with joy. Dan Johnson and his family came, along with neighbors who'd heard about the wedding and wanted to celebrate. When Hayes pronounced them husband and wife, the children cheered so loudly that the cattle in the far pasture startled. Grace threw flowers everywhere. The twins set off firecrackers they'd been saving, and Thomas gave the toast at dinner with surprising eloquence about second chances and the family they'd chosen. That night, lying beside her new husband in the room that was now truly theirs, Mara thought about the journey that had brought them here, about desperation and despair, about the moment on that dusty road when she'd been so certain it was the end, and about the quiet rancher who'd looked at her broken, desperate family and said the words that changed everything. "Then I want you all." Those words had saved them, had given them not just shelter and food, but a home, a real home, built on love and choice and the daily decision to show up for each other. "What are you thinking about?" Jonah asked, pulling her closer. "About how lucky we are, how easily things could have gone differently. But they didn't. We found each other. That's what matters." "We found each other," she agreed. "Or maybe you found us. Maybe we were exactly where we needed to be for you to find us." "Maybe so." He kissed her forehead. "Either way, I'm grateful. Every single day, I'm grateful." Outside, the ranch settled into its nighttime rhythms. Cattle lowed softly in the darkness. The windmill creaked its familiar song. And inside the house, but 8 people slept peacefully, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice and love, and the willingness to see value in what others had discarded. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibility. There would be hard days still. There always were. Winters to weather, challenges to face, the normal struggles of life and family. But they would face them together as they'd faced everything else. And in a land that had once given them nothing, they'd found everything that mattered: home, family, love, belonging. All because one man had looked at a desperate woman and her 6 children and seen not a burden, but a gift. And in choosing them, had found his own salvation. The summer sun that had once seemed so merciless now blessed their land with warmth and light. The dusty road that had nearly claimed them was just a road now, one path among many, leading somewhere better. And the children who'd once believed nobody wanted them woke each morning to a home where they were cherished, protected, and loved without conditions or limits. This was their story. This was their triumph. And this, finally, beautifully, completely, was their home.